This weekend we're opening the church doors again for communal worship. Mass on Saturday afternoon at 5:30 and again on Sunday at 10. Our numbers will of course be limited, and nonetheless it will be an enormous joy to see everybody back. And not only will I as the parish priest be happy to see people again, even if they're wearing masks, I'll recognise them by the bright and enthusiastic look in their eyes. And people will be looking at one another as well. One of the things we do at Mass when we gather together is, even though our gaze is focused, of course, on the sanctuary and the parish priest or the celebrant of the Mass is the focus of our attention more than anybody else, nonetheless we do look around at people, we see people, we observe. And one of the risks, I think, in this slow return to the new normality in church life is that our observance of other people, our joy at seeing them again, is somewhat tempered in that very natural human way by a critical look as well. We notice those who have come back, but we also notice bit by bit those who are absent. And one of the problems with all of that is, and this happened in normal times as well, that we rush to judgment about people, about the choices they're making, their decision not to come to Sunday Mass, their only occasional presence in the parish, and we then draw conclusions about their fidelity to the principles of Christian religion and whether or not we can apply that term, practicing Catholics, to them. And we use that term quite frequently in assessing whether a boy or girl can make their Holy Communion or their confirmation, or whether we're happy about a couple getting married in church. Are they practicing? And we draw conclusions from that as well about the other qualities of their life. But the parable which is at the center of today's gospel story is a very powerful one, and it cautions us against judgment at all, and certainly rushing to judgment, especially on other people. One might use another expression which Jesus employed as a preface to our reflections on the gospel parable itself. Pay attention to the speck in your own eye before attempting to remove, or pay attention to the speck, the beam in your own eye rather, before you start trying to remove the speck in somebody else's. And today's parable is about a farmer, again like last week, the sower who sows the seed. And he has a big field, and the soil is good, and the wheat or the grain grows up very quickly. But unfortunately, darnel, which is a pretty noxious weed which is quite common in the Middle East, also grows, and in fact threatens to smother the good crop. And the farmer's advisors say to him, wouldn't it be a good idea, before too much of your crop is damaged, to remove that darnel first and then let the wheat or the oats or the barley prosper? And the farmer very wisely says, no, let's wait until harvest time, and then we'll separate the wheat from the darnel. And that is a cautionary parable to those who judge others. Jesus sees himself as the farmer spreading the seed, but he sees himself as, towards the end of his public ministry, he depicted himself, especially when speaking about his return at the close of the age. That will be the time to separate the sheep from the goats and to separate the wheat from the darnel. In other words, let everybody grow up, fight their own battles, pursue their own path to virtue, and if vice takes hold of them, let that also alone until such a time as God, who sees into the hearts of men and women and is the unique position to make judgment on the quality of anybody's life, rather than setting ourselves up as censorious judges of other people's behavior. Leave that all to God. Now, of course, we can, by the example of our own lives, by pursuing our own path to virtue, by doing our best to live according to the commandments, and by practicing our own faith, give good example to those who may have lost the habit during lockdown, to those who perhaps may have changed their idea of God and the church during this period of great trial and tribulation. Our fidelity, our kindness, our concern, our decision to come back to church, to pray and to worship together can have a very beneficial ripple effect on others. So in that way, the darnel in other fields can be choked by the good example coming from our lives. And I think that that makes sense of this parable which we've heard today about the sower sowing the seed, the wheat and the darnel, and the moment of harvest, where the weeds are burnt and the wheat is harvested in the barn. That is an analogy, really, of the time of judgment, of the separation of the sheep from the goats, which is the other image which Jesus used to describe that great and decisive moment. But none of us has been appointed or delegated to be judge of anyone else's behavior. And the corrective mechanism we can employ is, of course, as I said earlier, the good example of our own lives, our own fidelity, the enthusiasm with which we re-embrace the joy of worshipping together, of listening to God's word as a community, of receiving the Eucharist as a family, and of course, of seeing and greeting one another again, due allowance being made for the social distancing, which is there to protect your health and mine. And so you who are watching this may have decided, no, I won't come back to Mass this Sunday, I'll wait and see. You're under no obligation to do so, but I think it's important to say that we do miss you, and we will be looking forward to seeing you soon again, when these restrictions will be relaxed and we will return to some form of normality. Because community is at the center of our identity as a parish family. We enjoy being together. It's good to know, of course, that when two or more are gathered together, that the Lord is present with them. But when 200 are gathered together, then I always have the feeling that somehow that presence of the Lord, which we believe in, is more dynamic, it's more vital, and it has more somehow spiritual substance. So all these ideas come together as we return to communal worship, as we, in a rather gingerly fashion, and certainly with great care and prudence, reopen the doors of our church and welcome you back into the pews, so that we can sing with one voice and pray with one heart. But rather than look at our neighbor, rather than judge those who aren't there, rather than rush to a decision about people and the way in which they're living their lives, let's take today's parable very much to heart. Be patient and allow God to be the unique judge, he who knows into the hearts and minds of every human being and loves every human being equally. Let the decision at the end of the day be up to him to separate the wheat from the darnel, the sheep from the goats, and the virtuous from those who perhaps have not been quite as faithful during their lives. But also remember that our God, as well as being infinitely good, is infinitely merciful, and we mustn't do anything to limit the generous embrace of his mercy and forgiveness.